Everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. On tonight's Watch Talk Wednesday, we have dispatch manager with the Woodlands Fire Department, Rick Erickson, here to do a presentation on the Woodlands Fire Department dispatch and how it works. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Rick. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Julie. My name is Rick Erickson with the Woodlands Fire Department Communications Dispatch. We're also known as FireCom, Montgomery County FireCom, because we handle all fire department communications for Montgomery County. So I'm going to explain to you how 911 works in Montgomery County and how the Woodlands Fire Department fits into this picture. So I'm going to start off with the PowerPoint. Can you see the screen?
Not at the moment.
Okay. How's that? Can you see the screen now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. Okay, so how 911 works in Montgomery County and how the Woodlands Fire Department plays into this process. So 911 is county-based. There's really only one central authority that maintains the network and the customer premise equipment, and that's the Montgomery County Emergency Communications District. So they are managed by a board appointed by the county and the cities of Montgomery County, and they oversee the budget to supply the 911 system for all the county PSAPs. So this is a map of Montgomery County. So most people know it's pretty big. It's 1,000 square miles. We have a population of 620,000 people, and that does not include, people just driving through 45, up 69, or people here for events at the town center, things going at Lake Conroe. So it's a very busy area, and we're based on what's called PSAPs. And a PSAP is a public safety answering point, and that's basically when you call 911, where that phone call is answered. So in Montgomery County, we have what's two primary answering points. So that's the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. That's the big one. They answer 79% of the 911 calls in Montgomery County. And the second is the Conroe Police Department, and they answer 21%. So basically, you call 911 in Montgomery County, it's likely going to be answered in one of these two locations. So Montgomery County is tasked for answering all the 911 calls for the unincorporated areas and the incorporated areas of Montgomery County, except for the city of Conroe. Based on how 911 is done, if you're in the border areas of Montgomery County, it could be picked up by Walker County or Tomball even. If you're in Creekside on the west portion of it, more than likely if you call 911 from a cell phone, you can be picked up by Tomball. These are the primary answering points, and they handle 80% of the 911 calls internally. So most 911 calls are law enforcement based. However, we also have what's called secondary answering points, and that's where the Woodlands Fire Department comes into play. So there's actually three secondary public safety answering points, or PSAPs, in Montgomery County. One is the Montgomery County Hospital District. They provide the ambulance services for Montgomery County. They also provide dispatch services for the Conroe Fire Department. Then there's the Woodlands Fire Department, and we're responsible for dispatching all the Woodlands Township. So it's Montgomery County and the Harris County part of the township, plus 10 fire departments in Montgomery County. They're funded by ESDs, or emergency service districts, and that includes up to 50-man fire stations. So the Woodlands only accounts for about 20% of the 911 calls that we process in our dispatch center. The other PSAP is the newest one, and that's the Conner Independent School District Police Department. It was decided, since they're one of the largest police departments in the county and they're responsible for the largest school districts in the county, all the schools, bus stops, and all that, to include them in the 911 process. So if the emergency occurs at a school, they can bring in Conner ISD PD Dispatch Center and on the call, they get all the mapping information. They can be on the knowledge of what's going on, so they can relay this information to their police officers. So the most important thing with 911 is getting the call to the right place. This has changed a lot over the last 15 years, certainly since I first started in 1992. Almost all of the calls made at that point were wireline calls. So basically your landline in your home, those phone numbers would tell how to direct that 911 call. And when it was directed, people would look at the screen and they'd know you're calling from 3 Elm Crescent, and that they would know that you're part of the sheriff's office for Montgomery County, you're part of the Woodlands Fire Department, you're part of the hospital district. So that the 911 operator could see where you were, your phone number, see a map where you were, and know the responders for your area. This has turned around quite a bit. So now we get very, very few wireline calls a month. I would say probably less than 5% of our 911 calls. By far the most is cell phones. So cell phones will direct you to a PSAP based on the cell tower sector. Most cell phone towers have 3 faces. Each one can be associated with its own ESN, which is emergency service number. What the ESN does is it tells the 911 call which PSAP to route it to, and not only which PSAP to route it to, what are the secondary PSAPs associated with it. So this can get pretty complicated when you start looking at a county-wide system, especially when you look at areas like Creekside, which is in Harris County. So they not only have a different primary law enforcement, they're answered by the Harris County Sheriff's Office. They receive contract services with the Precinct 4 Constable's Office, and they actually have a different EMS than the rest of the Woodlands. So the location and ESN is very important, making sure you get the right response as quickly as possible. Then we also have what's called VoIP, which is Voice over Internet Protocol. And I would say we probably get about 10%. A lot of businesses use VoIP now because it's cheaper. The downside of that is, people can move. And if you live in the Woodlands and you move to Kingwood, if you don't adjust it with your provider, you make that 911 call and it could look like you're still in the Woodlands. And, if you move out of state, even more problems occur. So with wireless, which like I said is our vast majority of our 911 calls, we have what's called phase 1 and phase 2. If you call from a rural area, you're likely only going to be able to connect to one cell phone site with one sector. And so you're not going to get a very accurate picture of where the people are. If you call in a more urban setting where there's a lot of cell phone towers and they can triangulate, you're going to get a much clearer picture of where the person's calling from. So when you call 911, you're always going to hear what's the location of your emergency. And they're probably going to ask you to repeat it just to make sure they get an accurate location. A lot of people are upset. So it's not uncommon for people to give their location, but they're calling for their mother who's having a heart attack. So they ask you again, just to kind of prompt people to make sure, okay, what's the address of the emergency? And they're going to ask people to repeat it because sometimes people just spurt out something and they don't think. So with the phase 2 cell phone data, we do get a pretty good picture where you are. But we also have technology, and technology is advancing very, very rapidly in 911. So we also get what's called enhanced ALI, which is automatic location information. We use a product which is embedded in not only in our call answering software, but also within our computer-aided dispatch system. And on top of that, we actually have a portal. And this product is called Rapid SOS, and it will look at different things from your device to get a real clear picture of where you're calling from. So the initial 911 call, it comes through its, the Vesta call processing system, and I have a couple of pictures of that for you. It's administered by the Montgomery County Emergency Communications District. They provide the network connection, the network, and the hardware and software for this call processing software. So when someone receives a 911 call, whether it's a primary PSAP or secondary PSAP, you're going to see what's on the right. So it's going to show the ESN, which routes the call. It's going to show an address. And when I redacted the street address off of this for privacy, it's going to show the person's phone number, the city they're calling from. It's going to give the XY coordinates, which helps them with the mapping. And it's going to show that they're getting phase 1 or phase 2 wireless, and also show their wireless provider. And along with this call taking screen, you get a map. And so this map is pretty accurate in pinpointing where the caller is calling from. You may not be able to see it in there, but it actually gives statistics on here about how accurate they believe the call information is, the alley information. And as mentioned, Rapid SOS uses items embedded in your phone. It can look at Wi-Fi access points. It can look at things like Waze to get better data than just the triangulation of cell phone towers. In addition to that, we'll get the Latin long. But if you call 911 from Montgomery County and you can't stay on the phone and you hang up, we can actually take your phone number, put it into this portal, and it's going to show us where you were, not only when you called, but it's going to track you for up to 15 minutes. So we can actually watch you moving down the road. In addition to that, if you're familiar with lat long, it's a long number. For this particular call, it shows a lat long of 30.26275 at minus 95.31765. Kind of not a burdensome thing to relay over the radio if somebody's trying to locate somebody. So we also have an app called What 3 Words that's embedded in this portal. And what that is, it replaces the GPS coordinates with 3 simple words, and it's associated with a 10 by 10 grid. And this goes throughout the whole globe. And so you can actually take, instead of those GPS coordinates, the 3 words associated with this person's location, and that's explain, thanks, head first. Okay, pretty simple words. It's very easy to relay over a radio. And if the responder doesn't have a patrol car with an MDC, or in a fire truck with an MDC, they could be on an ATV looking for somebody injured out in the woods. They're probably gonna have a cell phone on them. And that smartphone should have the What 3 Words app on there. They can type in these 3 words and it's gonna pinpoint where that person is. So it's pretty amazing technology, I think, and it's very rapidly developing. Again, this is just some information about Rapid SOS. You'll hear a lot of, and most of you probably heard of the Internet of Things. We have so many different devices that are connected to the internet now that Rapid SOS uses that data to get a good location for you. You have the Uber app, Lyft app. Things are coming out now called wearables, which are provided by Rapid SOS, which can be a necklace. And on that necklace, there's a pendant. When you touch that, they can generate a 911 call. Not only can it generate a 911 call, it can let your spouse know that you just made a 911 call to kind of alert them. So with our portal, we can track your devices for about 15 minutes, which is good if somebody can't see on the phone. Obviously, this would be good for law enforcement. Also, if somebody loses consciousness or whatever, they're in a moving vehicle, in a boat. We've used this quite a bit to keep track of people after they've terminated the 911 call. So I'm going to talk briefly about fire and EMS events, since that's what we specialize in. Also, the sheriff's office handles most of the communications for the county. They're on a single radio system. They know they have a robbery. People know their territory. The police are going to go. Fire department and EMS, it's a little bit more complicated. We have different types of fire trucks and we have different types of ambulances. Some are advanced life support, some are basic life support. Some fire trucks, like in the Woodlands, have paramedics on them. Most don't, but most of them have EMTs on it. So our responses are driven by what we call dirt. Whose dirt is it? So when we get this 911 call, as we've mentioned, we get a pretty good idea of where you are. Now, we also need to know location characteristics that don't necessarily come across for the 911 call, but in our computer dispatch system, we know where there's good fire hydrants. We know where there's no fire hydrants. We know where there's questionable fire hydrants, and where they're sparsely, large spaces between them, which may require doing water shuttles. So that can affect how you build your responses for the type of call and the location. So the next thing we look at when we get a fire EMS event is the type of incident. So the type of incident is going to determine what type of resources do we need. And on top of what type of resources we need, what type of capabilities. Those may sound like the same things, but basically a resource is something like an ambulance, a fire truck, a ladder truck, what's called a brush truck, which is basically kind of like a pickup truck for putting out grass fires. Well, a capability is anything that's a part of that truck. Not all engines, that particular engine. That engine may have the jaws of life on it. Another one may not. One engine may carry a paramedic on it. Another engine may not. So the type of engine is going to look at, we need these types of resources, but we're also going to want something with cascade, which is extra bottled air to help fill up air tanks. Or we may want something with a cyanide kit on board. So we have firefighters inside a building for a while, we can test them for cyanide poisoning. The next thing we look at is the location of emergency vehicles and their ETA to the call. Because we can change a response based on how close or how far certain resources are. So I use this as an example. This is a medical call. It's within the Woodlands, and it's classified as a T2, which is single life threat, which is basically a T2 is when somebody is either in full arrest, respiratory arrest, or pending arrest. So the call taker will go through a list of questions. The list of questions will classify this medical event as T1 through T6. If it's T2, like I said, which is pending arrest, it's going to say, we need to send this to this person. And I'll interpret this for you. So basically, we see at the very top, we have order. This is the priority. What's the first thing we need to do to get to this person who is in full arrest or about to be full arrest? And that's listed as a S still C. And what that means, it's the closest fire truck. It doesn't matter if it's a Woodlands fire truck, Condor fire truck, Timberlake's fire truck. It's going to look at where the person is and what is the closest truck. And almost all of our fire trucks throughout the county have what's called ABL on them. So they can be driving to training, driving back from a call, driving to the grocery store, and it sees where they are, and it sees where this T2 emergency is, and it's going to say, you're going to this call because you're a fire truck and you have EMTs on it. Then it's going to send an MICU, which is a mobile intensive care unit, which is an ambulance. But it's also an ambulance that carries paramedics as opposed to just EMTs. It's going to send an EMS supervisor. It has what's in here is a substitution. So what this says is there's basically 4 EMS supervisors in the county, and there's also a shift commander over all 4 of them. If the shift commander is closer than the supervisor, it's going to say send the shift commander instead. It's also going to look at here or respond with, if there's a squad, which is basically a SUV with a paramedic in it, that's within 6 minutes of this call, and they can get there faster than the ambulance, send them too, because it's a full arrest. They need all the hands they can. In the next level, you see 10 paramedic C, which is capability. So I mentioned before, in this order, it doesn't care what color your fire truck is, where it's coming from, it's the closest one. So if it's in the fringe of the Woodlands, or if a fire department from another agency is passing through, and it sends them, it's going to say, hey, this is a Woodlands call. Woodlands trucks have paramedics on it. Let's go ahead and send a paramedic unit as well. That may mean a squad, or it may mean a ladder truck or an engine, but it's going to send a Woodlands unit based on that it's staffed with a paramedic. Now, if that first engine up on top happens to be a Woodlands engine, nothing else will happen because it already sees there's a paramedic on it. Problem solved. If it's not a Woodlands unit, it's going to add a Woodlands unit on there for the paramedic. And this final one is a catch-all to where these substitutions where it sends a squad just to make sure that the squad's going. If they're at low level, just to make sure that an ambulance is going. And it It's really not going to send any additional resources. It's just going to make sure if one got missed in here, that one's going. So here's a picture of the CAD map, just to kind of illustrate a type of call and the locations of a unit. So this is a low-level EMS call that occurred. You can see that the ambulance is very close by, and so it just sent the ambulance. If that ambulance had not been right down the street and then be coming from Willis or Burnham Woods, and it had an ETA that was excessive, it would look and say, hey, this ambulance is going to take a while to get here. What else do we have here? Well, there's truck 101. That's a paramedic ambulance or paramedic apparatus. Let's send them to the call too. That way they can get there, start patient assessment, start patient care, and the ambulance gets there 10 minutes later, they're good to go. Load them up and take them to the hospital. Now, I'm going to talk briefly about some of the supplemental anti-alley stuff that we have in Montgomery County. I touched on Rapid SOS, which helps us find out where you are. But we also what's called Smart 911, which can tell us a little bit more about you if you choose to provide this information. So basically what Smart 911 does, this is provided to you by the Montgomery County Emergency Communications District. It's already paid for. You go to their website and you can put all the information you choose into your Smart 911 profile. It's a way of linking your phone numbers, your home addresses, business addresses, vehicle information, and pretty much anything else you want to put in there. Pets, watch out for our pet, make sure if our house is on fire, you save our pet. You can put things in there like if one of you have an elderly parent staying with you who's bedridden, you can put that information on there. And it links everything. So if you, for example, Arkansas, they have Smart 911 statewide. If somebody has a Smart 911 profile in Arkansas and they're driving to Galveston for summer vacation and they're going down 45 through Montgomery County and they call 911 and they're experiencing some type of medical condition, it's going to show up here. They'll be able to see their medical conditions, any medications they're on, and read that information to the responder. If you have a child who's attending college, out of the area or out of state, they call 911. That's associated with that Smart 911 process. It will link those phone numbers and your home address to that 911 call. This is a product by the same company. It's called RAVE Command View. And what this is, what you're seeing right now is a snapshot of the 911 calls that were active this afternoon. So each little phone you see along there is a 911 call. That's 59 or 69. That's 45. You can see Lake Conroe up there. This will also show any Smart 911 pops. Now, if somebody calls 911, the call taker is going to see that there's a Smart 911 profile associated with that phone number, and they can embed that information into the call. This is another layer of that where a supervisor can watch, for situational awareness and see that maybe one was missed or it went to another agency and see that maybe this is just a law enforcement call, but look, this could be a medical condition based on this person's profile, and it gives them information to act upon. We also have a product called Panic Button, which is primarily used for schools. And it's an app where faculty, certain staff members can activate this app for an active assailant within the school, for a fire emergency, for a medical emergency, or other law enforcement type of calls. With this app, and we're trying to get all the schools in Montgomery County to adopt this, this program. If it's, we'll just say, for example, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's storming, and there's a really bad wreck on 45, and 15 911 calls are generated. And the sheriff's office is also doing, they're getting 15 911 calls all at once. Somebody uses this Panic Button app. It can alert all the PSAPs with this loud audible flashing emblem that there's an active shooter at, say, Willis High School. And this will be before the 911 call is even delivered to the primary PSAP. So it's a pretty powerful tool. You can initiate text messaging with the person who activates the panic button. This text messaging can also notify other people within the facility based on the type of emergency and their profile. So if you had a student collapse in the track, they use the panic button to initiate a medical emergency. If there's a school nurse on location or some of the trainers or EMTs, will alert them. So before the 911 call is even received at the primary dispatch center, they're on the way to the patient. With the precinct, with Willis Independent School District, they contract with the Precinct 1 Constable's Office for law enforcement services for their schools. Every one of those officers will receive an activation on their cell phones when a smart 911 activation occurs, a panic button activation occurs. And again, those officers out in the patrol cars will know about before the 911 call is even received at the sheriff's office. Another tool we have that we use through RAVE is called RAVE Prepare. When people set up their smart 911 profile, like I said, they can mention their medical needs. They can mention that, maybe they have mobility issues. This is very good information to know if they live in an area that's flooding. So it's 3 o'clock in the morning. All of a sudden we get one of those weird, spring storms, and we get 10 inches of rain, and all of a sudden now the neighborhood's being flooded in. We can draw a polygon over that area and look and see if there's any special needs people within that area. They can see that and act upon it. Okay, we're gonna need to get special boats in here to evacuate some of these people because they can't walk. They're gonna need, stair chairs or stretchers or, backboards to get them out of there. Let's start now and not wait until the flooding gets worse. Another tool with this is if an area becomes isolated because of a flood and there's a medical emergency there, and it may be a while before you can get an ambulance or fire department in there to assist them, you can actually run an inquiry and find out who's medically trained there. So it may show you that there's a paramedic or an RN that lives in the area. You can contact them and say, hey, somebody down the street from you is having a baby. It's going to take us a while to get an ambulance there. Can you help out? So I would like to speak briefly before I get into the next generation 911 about our cooperation with the hospital district. So fire and EMS have always worked closely together. We operate from 2 different dispatch centers. One is in the south part of Conroe, and we're in the Woodlands near the pavilion. We operate off the same CAD system, which is important because we know where their ambulances are and how long it's going to take them to get to a call. They know where our fire trucks are, what their capabilities are, and how long it's going to take them to get to a call. We share the same VESTA system. So we actually have it set up where if we're super busy, there's a thunderstorm that pops up and our 911 lines are ringing off the hook, they can help out. So instead of that call just ringing until there's the next available call taker here, they can jump in and say, hey, they're busy, let's grab this line. And the same the other way around. And typically fire seems busy, EMS is quiet. EMS is busy, fire is quiet. So it's a very good process we have. If they're having a just busy EMS day and somebody calls 911, it goes to the secondary PSAP and it rings for a targeted amount of time, preset determined time. It will ring concurrently at both centers until the next available call taker can grab that phone. We also have this set up to where if we know a storm's coming, whether it's a hurricane or just a strong front coming through, we can set that rollover to 0. And so that way, when a 911 call is transferred to the secondary PSAPs, it rings concurrently at both centers and the first person available picks it up. So are there any questions at this point before I start talking about next gen 911?
Question here. How hard is it to understand people when they are panicking, and how would you handle that call?
I remember the first panicky person I got on a 911 call. I won't get into the details, but it was a mother a founder's son. He had passed away, and I picked up the 911 call. I just started my shift. I think it was like my third day here, and I couldn't understand a word she said. And I think I just, used a tool we called repetitive persistence. And I just kept asking her, we want to help you. I need to know where you are. What is going on? And finally, she was able to get enough of that information out where I could get, okay, this is the right address. This is kind of what we have here. This is what we need to send. Sometimes you'll get a caller who will call and they're perfectly calm and they're reporting something where you're just amazed that they're so calm. And I guess probably child callers are very difficult. I don't take that many 911 calls myself anymore unless it's like really, really busy. But we are the primary dispatch center for Lake Conroe. We get about 50 calls on Lake Conroe a year. Most of them end up being very routine and units get put back in service pretty quickly. But we also have a lot of really horrible calls on Lake Conroe. And another difficulty with Lake Conroe is you don't have an address. You don't have an intersection. Everybody tends to say, they're on the lake, the main body of the lake. They may be able to say they're in a cove, but typically it's almost like an inside thing. We just kind of say they usually see they're either by the 1097 bridge or by the lighthouse. Because if you're in the middle of Lake Conroe, those are two things you can see because they're so big. But if you're trying to get the fire boats to the person and it's 3 o'clock in the morning, they're probably not next to the 1097 bridge or the lighthouse. So we use our tools, the calming techniques. We use the rapid SOS devices. We actually have another thing through that RAVE command view I showed you where we can send a link to somebody's cell phone, which when they click on that link, it gives us permission to activate their cell phone camera. So they can be in the middle of Lake Conroe. They can't really explain where they are, but we can send them this link. They can click on the link and we now have access to their camera. We can ask them to do this. And the call taker can try and get a little bit better information where they are. Like I said, there's people sometimes are in such bad situations, they just really can't speak. They can't explain what's going on. And that's a very scary position to be in. But we have well-trained people. We go through a lot of classes, put them through a lot of stuff before they start taking 911 calls. And we use a program called ProQA, which has pre-scripted calming statements in there for people. And we always end up getting the right location, getting people there. So
that was a good question. And it looks like I don't have any more questions at this time for you. So if you wanted to go on to your next part of the presentation.
Sure. Basically, just at this point, I just wanted to talk about what's called next generation 911. 911, like a lot of, I want to say government, but a lot of industries are very reactive in doing things. Now, when people started switching from landlines to cell phones, it caught 911 off guard because they're just so used to getting this accurate, knowing where you're calling from because you're calling from your house phone. And now people are calling from the road, calling from the street. They're taking their cell phone, their phone numbers with them when they leave the area. So, area codes and prefixes really don't mean so much anymore. So the next gen 911 is a process led by the federal government, FTC, to a certain extent Congress, with funding, but also with what's called NENA, which is the National Emergency Number Association, to set these standards as we move forward with next generation 911. So right now, 911 is really based on old telephone technology. I mentioned the ESN, which started with the 10-digit landlines that people had. And it would go to, you'd make a 911 call and it would go to what's called a selective router, where it would say, okay, it needs to go to this primary PSAP. And it would list out what the secondary PSAPs were if it needed to be transferred to one of them. even today, you make a 911 call, whether it's from a landline or a cell phone, it actually gets routed down to the medical center to what's called a tandem, which is run by the phone company, AT&T, where it routes the phone back up here through wire lines, which can be cut. And there are backups to it, but when you have copper lines going through dirt, over waterways, just not an ideal situation. So next gen 911 to really kind of start off explaining what that is. It's more resilient. It is a network of networks. So you may have a standalone network in Montgomery County, but that's tied to the region. So it's part of Greater Harris County. It's part of our surrounding counties, Walker County, Grimes County, where it makes transferring easier. You can also set up certain rules where if one area is getting inundated with 911 calls, rules can be set up for like, okay, something's going on there. Let's start filtering some of these or transferring some of these calls, rerouting some of these calls to another piece app. Let them handle it because something's going on there. They're being overwhelmed. It also adds more bandwidth to the process. So right now in Montgomery County, you can text 911, but like texting, sometimes it's not instant. Our system's set up now where a call taker can actually be responsible for multiple text sessions. It hasn't really caught on yet. We do encourage people to call if you can, text if you can't. But as we move forward, we're going to move away from the regular text messaging where sometimes the messages can come disjointed, to moving in what's called real-time text. So this is basically where you'll be able to have instant messaging with 911, and it'll be more real-time. That's one improvement we're going to see over the next couple of years. Montgomery County is slated to implement Next Gen 911 by December of 2023, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 2024. Either way, it's right around the corner. With Next Gen, you'll be able to send pictures to the 911 call taker. You'll be able to send video, and this is going to change the process quite a bit. There's advantages and disadvantages of it. You'll be able to, if you have a trauma patient, you're waiting for the ambulance to get there. You may be in a rural area, maybe 15 minutes. You can take a picture of the wound and get instructions on how to treat that by the 911 call taker. You can send a video, same thing. It will also allow, even more routine things for like telemedicine. Instead of actually sending an ambulance, you may just have a doctor or a nurse practitioner look at the patient, do an assessment by video, and say, okay, we'll get somebody to you, but here's some alternative things you can use instead of just of us sending an ambulance. That's going to change law enforcement quite a bit, in that people can see a bank robbery or some other type of crime in process, whip out their smartphone, start recording it, and actually be able to send that to 911. 911 can get this video, and through a program called FirstNet, which is basically broadband for public safety, push that video out to a responder to see on their MDC, so they can just see the crime in process. They can see the suspect as they respond to the call. This is also going to cause a lot of shifts in 911. I think it's very expensive, so we'll see a lot of consolidation. A lot of rural areas will have a dispatch center with like 1 or 2 people in it, and that's just not going to work in the next gen environment. It's also going to make things more difficult on call takers. As I mentioned, you have the Internet of Things. So many things are hooked up to video now that when a crime occurs or an accident occurs, they'll be able to access these cameras, and they're going to be the first eyes on the scene. And so the 911 call takers are exposed to a lot more visual trauma. So they're afraid that's going to cause some turnover. It's going to make training more difficult, recruiting more difficult. But all in all, it will make the system better for the caller, and that's really, really the goal. With this, it's also going to allow more expansion during an emergency. I think it was Kentucky was hit by a tornado 6 weeks, 2 months ago. And of course, their 911 center is probably just overwhelmed. A tornado going through an suburban area. NextGen will allow these calls to spill over easier and be processed without having to ring for a certain amount of time. So basically, agencies will be better able to support one another during busy times. I'm also part of a group that is writing a ANSI document for virtual PSAPs. What we mean by a virtual PSAP is virtual workers, like people did, started doing a lot more during the pandemic, but will allow people to start taking 911 calls more on the fly, either from their home or going to an alternate dispatch site where equipment's pre-positioned, logging in and start taking 911 calls. This would be important during storms like Imelda. If you lived in Magnolia in September 2019, you probably didn't even know there was a tropical storm going over Montgomery County because it only affected the east side. But that was probably one of the busiest storms we ever had because we weren't really able to prepare for it. We called people in, we got people in, we took care of the calls. But with NextGen and virtual PSAP management, we'll be able to do that. Somebody could be at home, pull up a laptop and start taking 911 calls without having to get in the car, drive somewhere, log in, and do all this. So that's going to be a pretty exciting thing. This has actually already been done. It's done during the pandemic in Arlington, Virginia, where they started having all their call takers. They couldn't really social distance in a 911 call center. So they started having their 911 call takers work from home. And there were some things they had to work out, but they got there. And I think technology is going to be there. It's already here. Some people aren't going to like it, but I think the public will demand it because I think there's an expectation now. You call 911, whether it's on a sunny Friday afternoon or during a hurricane, that somebody's going to answer it timely and they're going to get help there as quickly as possible. Any other questions on NextGen 911 or anything else?
I don't see any questions, but boy, there's sure a lot that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
That was a lot of information. Thank you so much. That was very informative. And we appreciate you sharing that with us tonight, Rick.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to stop the recording now. Oops.